Public Radio, in association with Independent Radio Drama Productions, presents one of the cases of Sherlock Holmes, with Edward Petherbridge as Sherlock Holmes and David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson. This is episode 2 of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Over a morning breakfast at Baker Street, Dr. Watson examines a walking stick that had been left behind by a visitor who had called the night before when Holmes and Watson were out.
It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, a sort which is known as a Penang lawyer. Just under the head was a broad silver band, nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., it was engraved upon it, with the date, 1884. It was such a stick as the old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, and reassuring.
From this evidence, Holmes deduces that Dr. Mortimer is a young physician, resident in the country, and the owner of the dog. The good doctor himself soon appears on Holmes' doorstep.
Now, here's the dramatic moment of fate, Watson. When you hear a step upon the stair which is walking into your life, and you know not whether for good or ill, what does Dr. James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, the specialist in crime?
Come in. After introducing himself, Dr. Mortimer produces an 18th century manuscript narrative on the origin of the Hound of the Baskervilles. It was during the period of English history known as the Great Rebellion that Baskerville Hall in Dartmoor was occupied by Sir Hugo Baskerville, an evil, violent man. One terrible night, he kidnapped a young farm girl and brought her to the hall intending to rape her. But the young woman escaped while Sir Hugo and his friends were drinking. He pursued her across the moor, unleashing a pack of hounds to run her to ground. In the wild chase over the desolate landscape, Sir Hugo outdistanced his companions. Suddenly, the hounds loosed by Sir Hugo came tumbling back in fright. The men moved on slowly and found the girl dead from exhaustion and fear. Nearby was Sir Hugo. Over him, its jaws sunk deep into his throat, was a foul thing, a great black beast shaped like a hound. This was the curse of the Baskervilles. Although he is a man of science, Dr. Mortimer half believes that it was this curse that has killed the most recent occupant of the hall, Sir Charles Baskerville. Dr. Mortimer is recalling a disturbing conversation he had with the dead man as we begin episode 2 of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Edward Petherbridge is Sherlock Holmes.
You're asking if I've seen the dread hound, Sir Charles. The answer is no. Had you asked me about medical calls, I really do think you should take more care of yourself. I feel your concern about the hound legend is somewhat exhausting your nerves. Perhaps you might like to join us. Please forgive me. I speak to you as a friend, as well as a doctor. What on earth's the matter?
Did you not see that? There. It was there.
But I saw something. Perhaps it was a large black car.
No. I'm cursed. Utterly cursed.
You're nothing of the sort. Sir Charles, I really think you should consider taking a break from Baskerville Hall. I'm concerned that this constant anxiety is going to do you some harm.
I'm not going mad, you know. I did see it. I'm sure of it.
One false statement was made by Barrymore at the inquest. He said that there were no traces upon the ground round the body. He did not observe any. But I did. Some little distance off, but fresh and clear.
The footprint?
Footprints.
A man's or a woman?
Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound.
You saw this?
As clearly as I see you.
And you said nothing?
What was the use?
How was it that no one else saw it?
The marks were some 20 yards from the body, and no one gave them a thought. I don't suppose I should have done so, had I not known this later.
There are many sheepdogs on the moor.
No doubt, but this was no sheepdog.
You say it was large,
Enormous.
but it had not approached the body.
No.
What sort of night was it?
Damp and raw.
But not actually raining.
No.
What is the alley like?
Well, there are 2 lines of old yew hedge, 12 feet high, and impenetrable. The walk in the centre is about 8 feet across.
Is there anything between the hedges and the walk?
Yes, there's a strip of grass about 6 feet broad on either side.
I understand that the yew hedge is penetrated at one point by a gate.
Yes, the wicket gate which leads onto the moor.
Is there any other opening?
None.
So that to reach the yew alley, one either has to come down it from the house or else to enter it by the moor gate.
But there is an exit through a summer house at the far end.
Had Sir Charles reached it?
No, he lay about 50 yards from it.
Now, tell me, Dr. Mortimer, and this is important. The marks which you saw were on the path and not on the grass.
Well, no marks could show on the grass.
Were they on the same side of the path as the moor gate?
Yes, they were on the edge of the path on the same side as the moor gate.
You interest me exceedingly. Another point. Was the wicket gate closed?
Closed and padlocked.
How high was it?
About 4 feet.
Then anyone could have got over it.
Yes.
And what marks did you see by the wicket gate?
None in particular.
Good heavens. Did no one examine?
Yes, I'd done it myself.
And found nothing?
Well, it was all very confused. Sir Charles had evidently stood there for 5 or 10 minutes.
How do you know that?
Because the ash had twice dropped from his cigar.
Excellent. This is a colleague, Watson, after our own heart. But the marks.
He left his own marks all over that small patch of gravel. I could discern no others.
If I had only been there. It is evidently a case of extraordinary interest, and one which presents immense opportunities to the scientific expert. That gravel page upon which I might have read so much has been smudged by the rain and defaced by the clogs of curious peasants. Oh, Dr. Mortimer, to think that you should not have called me in. You have indeed much to answer for.
I could not call you in, Mr. Holmes, without disclosing those facts to the world, and I've already given my reasons for not wishing to do so. Besides,
why do you hesitate?
there is a realm in which the most acute and most experienced of detectives is helpless.
You mean that the thing is supernatural?
I did not positively think it. Since the tragedy, Mr. Holmes, there have come to my ears several incidents which are hard to reconcile with the settled order of nature.
For example?
Well, I find that before the terrible event occurred, several people had seen a creature upon the moor which corresponds with this Baskerville demon, which could not possibly be any animal known to science. They all agree that it was a huge creature, luminous, ghastly, and spectral. I have cross-examined these men. One of them a hard-headed countryman, one a farrier, and one a moorland farmer, who all tell the same story of this dreadful apparition, exactly corresponding to the hellhound of the legend. I assure you that there is a reign of terror in the district, and that it is a hardy man who will cross the moor at night.
And you, a trained man of science, believe it to be supernatural?
I don't know what to believe.
I have hitherto confined my investigations to this world. In a modest way, I have combated evil, but to take on the father of evil himself would perhaps be too ambitious a task. Yet you must admit that the footmark is material.
The original hound was material enough to cut a man's throat out, and yet he was diabolical as well.
I see that you've gone quite over to the supernaturalists. But now, Dr. Mortimer, tell me this. If you hold these views, why have you come to consult me at all? You tell me in the same breath that it is useless to investigate Sir Charles's death, and that you desire me to do it.
I did not say that I desired you to do it.
Then how can I assist you?
By advising me as to what I should do with Sir Henry Baskerville, who arrived at Waterloo Station in exactly 1 hour and a quarter.
He being the heir?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
On the death of Sir Charles, we inquired for this young gentleman and found that he'd been farming in Canada. From the accounts which have reached us, he is an excellent fellow in every way. I speak now not as a medical man, but as a trustee and executor of Sir Charles's will.
There is now the claimant, I suppose?
None. The only other kinsman who we have been able to trace was Roger Baskerville, the youngest of three brothers, of whom poor Sir Charles was the elder. The second brother, who died young, is the father of this lad Henry. The third, Roger, was the black sheep of the family. He came of the old masterful Baskerville strain. It was the very image, they tell me, of the family picture of old Hugo. He made England too hot to hold him, fled to Central America, and died there in 1876 of yellow fever. Henry is the last of the Baskervilles. In 1 hour and 5 minutes, I meet him at Waterloo Station. I've had a wire that he arrived at Southampton this morning. Now, Mr. Holmes, what would you advise me to do with him?
Why should he not go to the home of his fathers?
It seems natural, does it not? And yet consider that every Baskerville who goes there meets with an evil fate. I feel sure that if Sir Charles could have spoken with me before his death, he would have warned me against bringing this, the last of the old race, and the heir to that deadly place. And yet it cannot be denied that the prosperity of the whole poor, bleak countryside depends upon his presence. All the good work which has been done by Sir Charles will crash to the ground if there is no tenant of the hall. Fear lest I should dissuade too much by my own obvious interest in the matter. And that is why I bring the case before you and ask your advice.
Put into plain words, the matter is this. In your opinion, there is a diabolical agency which makes Dartmoor an unsafe abode for a Baskerville. That is your opinion?
Well, at least I might go the length of saying that there is some evidence that this may be so.
Exactly. But surely, if your supernatural theory be correct, it could work the young man evil in London as in Devonshire. A devil with merely local powers, like a parish vestry, would be too inconceivable a thing.
You put the matter more flippantly, Mr. Holmes, than you would probably do if you were brought into personal contact with these things. Your advice, then, as I understand it, is that the young man will be as safe in Devonshire as in London. He comes in 50 minutes. What would you recommend?
I recommend, sir, that you take a cab, call off your spaniel, who is scratching at my front door, and proceed to Waterloo to meet Sir Henry Baskerville.
And then?
And then you will say nothing to him at all until I have made up my mind about the matter.
Well, how long will it take you to make up your mind?
24 hours. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, Dr. Mortimer, I will be much obliged to you if you will call upon me here. And it will be of help to me in my plans for the future if you will bring Sir Henry Baskerville with you.
I will do so, Mr. Holmes.
Only one more question. Dr. Mortimer, you say that before Sir Charles Baskerville's death, several people saw this apparition upon the moor?
3 people did.
Did any see it after?
I have not heard of it.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Holmes.
Going out, Watson?
Oh, unless I can help you.
No, my dear fellow. It is at the hour of action that I turn to you for aid. But this is splendid, really unique from some points of view. When you pass Bradley's, would you ask him to send up a pound of the strongest shag tobacco?
Of course.
Thank you. It would be as well if you could make it convenient not to return before evening. Then I should be very glad to compare impressions as to this most interesting problem which has been submitted to us this morning.
I knew that seclusion and solitude were very necessary for my friend in those hours of intense mental concentration during which he weighed every particle of evidence, constructed alternative theories, balanced one against the other, and made up his mind as to which points were essential and which immaterial. I, therefore, spent the day at my club and did not return to Baker Street until evening. It was nearly 9 o'clock when I found myself in the sitting room once more. My first impression as I opened the door was that a fire had broken out, for the room was so filled with smoke that the light of the lamp upon the table was blurred by it. As I entered, however, my fears were set at rest, for it was the acrid fumes of strong, coarse tobacco which took me by the throat.
Good heavens! Oh!
Caught cold, Watson?
No, it's this poisonous atmosphere.
I suppose it is pretty thick, now that you mention it.
Dick, it's intolerable.
Open the window, then. You have been at the club all day, I perceive.
My dear Holmes.
Am I right?
Certainly. But how?
There is a delightful freshness about you, Watson, which makes it a pleasure to exercise any small powers which I possess at your expense.
A gentleman goes forth on a showery and miry day. He returns immaculate in the evening with the gloss still on his hat and his boots. He has been a fixture, therefore, all day. He is not a man with intimate friends. Where, then, could he have been? Is it not obvious?
Well, it is rather obvious.
The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observed. Where do you think that I have been?
A fixture also.
On the contrary, I've been to Devonshire.
In spirit.
Exactly. My body has remained in this armchair, and as I regret to observe, consumed in my absence 2 large pots of coffee and an incredible amount of tobacco. After you left, I sent down to Stamford for the Ordnance Survey map of this portion of the moor, and my spirit has hovered over it all day. I flatter myself that I could find my way about.
A large map, I presume.
Very large. Here you have the particular district which concerns us. That is Baskerville Hall in the middle.
With the wood around it.
Exactly. I fancy the yew alley, though not marked under that name, must stretch along this line, with the moor, as you perceive, upon the right of it.
Mm-hmm.
This small clump of buildings here is the hamlet of Grimpen, where our friend Dr. Mortimer had his headquarters. Mm-hmm. Within a radius of 5 miles there are, as you see, only a very few scattered dwellings. Here is Laughter Hall, which was mentioned in the narrative. There is a house indicated here that might be the residence of the naturalist, Stapleton, if I remember right was his name. Here are 2 moorland farmhouses, High Tor and Foulmire. Then, 14 miles away, the great convict prison of Princeton. Between and around these scattered points extends the desolate, lifeless moor. This, then, is the stage upon which tragedy has been played, and upon which we may help to play it again.
It must be a wild place.
Yes. The setting is a worthy one. If the devil did desire to have a hand in the affairs of men.
Then you are yourself inclining to the supernatural explanation?
The devil's agents may be of flesh and blood, may they not? There are 2 questions waiting for us at the outset. The one is whether any crime has been committed at all. The second is, what is the crime and how was it committed? Of course, if Dr. Mortimer's surmise should be correct, and we are dealing with forces outside the ordinary laws of nature, there is an end to our investigation. But we are bound to exhaust all other hypotheses before falling back upon this one. I think we'll shut that window again, if you don't mind.
Oh.
It is a singular thing, but I find that a concentrated atmosphere helps a concentration of thought. I have not pushed it to the length of getting into a box to think, but that is the logical outcome of my convictions. Have you turned the case over in your mind?
Yes, I've thought a good deal about it in the course of the day.
What do you make of it?
It is very bewildering.
It certainly has a character of its own. There are points of distinction about it. That change in the footprints, for example, what do you make of that?
Mortimer said that the man had walked on tiptoe down that portion of the alley.
He only repeated what some fool had said at the inquest. Why should a man walk on tiptoe down the alley?
What then?
He was running, Watson, running desperately, running for his life, running until he burst his heart and fell dead upon his face.
Running from what?
There lies our problem. There are indications that the man was crazed with fear before ever he began to run.
How can you say that?
I am presuming that the cause of his fears came to him across the moor. If that were so, and it seems most probable, only a man who had lost his wits would have run from the house instead of to it. If the gypsy's evidence may be taken as true, he ran with cries for help in the direction where help was least likely to be. Then again, whom was he waiting for that night? And why was he waiting for him in the yew alley rather than in his own house?
And you think that he was waiting for someone?
The man was elderly and infirm. We can understand his taking an evening stroll, but the ground was damp and the night inclement. Is it natural that he should stand for 5 or 10 minutes as Dr. Mortimer, with more practical sense than I should have given him credit for, deduced from the cigar ash?
But he went out every evening.
I think it unlikely that he waited at the Moorgate every evening. On the contrary, the evidence is that he avoided the moor. That night he waited there. It was the night before he made his departure for London. The thing takes shape, Watson. It becomes coherent. Might I ask you to hand me my violin?
Of course.
We will postpone all further thought upon this business until we have had the advantage of meeting Dr. Mortimer and Sir Henry Baskerville in the morning.
Our breakfast table was cleared early, and Holmes waited in his dressing gown for the promised interview. Our clients were punctual to their appointment, for the clock had just struck 10 when Dr. Mortimer was shown up, followed by the young baronet. The latter was a small, alert, dark-eyed man, about 30 years of age, very sturdily built, with thick black eyebrows and a strong, pugnacious face. He wore a ruddy-tinted tweed suit and had the weather-beaten appearance of one who has spent most of his time in the open air. And yet there was something in his steady eye and the quiet assurance of his bearing which indicated the gentleman.
This is the Henry Baskerville.
Why, yes. And the strange thing is, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, that if my friend here had not proposed coming round to you this morning, I should have come on my own. I understand that you think out little puzzles. I've had one this morning which wants more thinking out than I am able to give it.
Pray, take a seat, Sir Henry. Do I understand you to say that you have yourself had some remarkable experience since you arrived in London?
Nothing of much importance, Mr. Holmes. Only a joke, as like as not. It was this letter, if you can call it a letter, which reached me this morning.
Who knew that you were going to the Northumberland Hotel?
No one could have known. We only decided after I met Dr. Mortimer.
But Dr. Mortimer was no doubt already stopping there.
No, I'd been staying with a friend. There was no possible indication that we intended to go to this hotel.
Someone seems to be very deeply interested in your movements. As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moor.
Now, perhaps you will tell me, Mr. Holmes, what in thunder is the meaning of that? And who it is that takes so much interest in my affairs?
What do you make of it, Dr. Mortimer? You must allow that there is nothing supernatural about this, at any rate.
No, sir, but it might very well come from someone who was convinced that the business is supernatural.
What business? It seems to me that all you gentlemen know a great deal more than I do about my own affairs.
You shall share our knowledge before you leave this room, Sir Henry. I promise you that. We will confine ourselves to the present, and with your permission, to this very interesting document, which must have been put together and posted yesterday evening. Have you yesterday's Times, Watson?
Yeah, it is here in the corner.
Might I trouble you for it? The inside page, please, with the leading article. Capital article, this, on free trade. Permit me to give you an extract from it. You may be cajoled into imagining that your own special trade or your own industry will be encouraged by a protective tariff. But it stands to reason that such legislation must in the long run keep away wealth from the country, diminish the value of our imports, and lower the general conditions of life in the island. What do you think of that, Watson? Don't you think that is an admirable statement?
I don't know much about the tariff and things of that kind, but it seems to me that we've got a bit off the trail so far as that note is concerned.
On the contrary. I think we are particularly hot upon the trail, Sir Henry. Watson here knows more about my methods than you do, but I fear that even he has not quite grasped the significance of this sentence.
No, I confess that I see no connection.
And yet, my dear Watson, there is so very close a connection that the one is extracted out of the other. You, your life, reason, value, keep away from the. Don't you see now whence these words have been taken?
By thunder, you're right. Well, if that ain't smart,
If any possible doubt remains, it is settled by the fact that keep away and from the are cut out in one piece.
Well, now, so it is.
Really, Holmes, this exceeds anything which I could have imagined. Well, I could understand anyone saying that the words were from a newspaper, but that you should name which, and add that it came from a leading article, is really one of the most remarkable things which I've ever known. How did you do it?
It is a special hobby of mine. The detection of typefaces is one of the most elementary branches of knowledge to the special expert in crime, though I confess that once, when I was very young, I confused the Leeds Mercury with the Western Morning News. But a Times leader is entirely distinctive, and these words could have been taken from nothing else. As it was done yesterday, the strong probability was that we should find the words in yesterday's issue.
So far as I can follow you then, Mr. Holmes, someone cut out this message with a scissors.
Nail scissors. You can see that it was a very short-bladed scissors, since the cutter has had to take 2 snips over keep away.
That is so. Someone then cut out the message with a pair of short-bladed scissors, pasted it with paste.
Gum.
With gum onto the paper. But I want to know why the word Moor should have been written in longhand.
Because he could not find it in print. The other words were all simple and might be found in any issue, but Moor would be less common.
Why, of course. That would explain it. Have you read anything else in this message, Mr. Holmes?
There are one or two indications, and yet the utmost pains have been taken to remove all clues. The address, you observe, is printed in rough characters. But the Times is a paper which is seldom found in any hands, but those of the highly educated. We may take it, therefore, that the letter was composed by an educated one, and his efforts to conceal his own writing suggest that the writing might be known, or come to be known by you. Again, you will observe that the words are not gummed on in an accurate line, but that some are much higher than others. Life, for example, is quite out of its proper place. That may point to carelessness, or it may point to agitation and hurry upon the part of the cutter. On the whole, I incline to the latter view, since the matter was evidently important, and it is unlikely that the composer of such a letter would be careless. If he were in a hurry, it opens up the interesting question why he should be in a hurry, since any letter posted up to early morning would reach Sir Henry before he could leave his hotel. Did the composer fear an interruption, and from whom?
Well, we're coming now rather into the region of guesswork.
I would say rather into the region where we balance probabilities and choose the most likely. It is the scientific use of the imagination. But we have always some material basis on which to start our speculations. Now, you could call this a guess, no doubt, but I am almost certain that this address has been written in an hotel.
Well, how in the world can you say that?
If you examine it carefully, you will see that both the pen and the ink have given the writer trouble. The pen has spluttered twice in a single word, and has run dry 3 times in a short address, showing that there was very little ink in the bottle. Now, a private pen or ink bottle is seldom allowed to be in such a state, and the combination of the two must be quite rare. But you know the hotel ink and the hotel pen, where it is rare to get anything else. Yes, I have very little hesitation in saying that could we examine the waste paper baskets of the hotels round Charing Cross until we found the remains of the mutilated Times leader, we should lay our hands straight upon the person who sent this singular message. Hello. What's this?
Sherlock Holmes stalks a stalker on the next episode of Arthur Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles, adapted for radio by Tim Crook and directed by Richard Shannon. Edward Petherbridge was Sherlock Holmes, with David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson. Other members of the cast were Stephen Thorne as Dr. Mortimer and Bill Roberts as Sir Henry Baskerville. Support for this program comes from National Public Radio member stations and NPR, whose contributors include LexisNexis, helping legal, business, and government professionals collect, manage, and use information, and the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund, helping people to make the arts part of their everyday lives. I'm Steve Zakar. This is NPR, National Public Radio.